Good evening. Thank you all for joining us for this special Juneteenth program. I'm Randy McKinney, Board President of the Windsor Historical Society. For those who do not know, Juneteenth's origins are in the Civil War, when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. He established that all enslaved people in Confederate states in rebellion against the Union shall be thenceforward, and forever free. It is important to note that this only applied to former Confederate states. There were still legally enslaved people in states that never seceded from the Union. They would not be freed until the ratification of the 13th Amendment almost 3 years later. And there were also places in Confederacy where the Emancipation Proclamation could not be implemented because they were still under Confederate control. This included Texas. Freedom finally came to Texas on June 19, 1865, when 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay. The Army announced that the more than 250,000 enslaved individuals in the state were free and enforced the decree. This day came to be known as Juneteenth by the newly freed people of Texas. Juneteenth was marked with the celebrations among the Black communities in Texas for years to come. Over the decades, it spread from its home state and began to take on a larger cultural context, representing the celebration of the end of slavery, not just in Texas, but for all. Over 150 years later, following many efforts to establish this second Independence Day, Juneteenth was finally declared a federal holiday in 2021. Tonight, in recognition of Juneteenth, we are gathered on ground walked by enslaved people here in Windsor to acknowledge their stories and to celebrate the freedom that this national holiday represents. On this spot, we remember the names of Jack Jaffet Pell, Sarah, her daughter Elizabeth Betty Stevenson, Sarah, and Nancy Tony. These are the names of the people that we know lived and worked in the two Chafee houses across the street, between which this program originally was going to take place across the street. There is much that we will never know about their daily lives, but we can say with certainty that they walked regularly across the yard, that on occasion would have worked here, doing laundry, prepping food, or a dozen other tasks, or shared stories and words of support. It is in their honor and the memory of the thousands like them here in Connecticut that we ask you to commemorate Juneteenth with us today. Just like the individuals enslaved on this site would have spoken their stories here in the yard, we ask you to read the words of another man enslaved in Connecticut, Windsor Smith. Windsor Smith was born with a Broteer in the village of Dukarandra in what is modern-day Ghana around 1729. He was the oldest child of a Prince Jagam Pharaoh and his first wife. As a young boy, his home was attacked by an army of slave traders. His father was killed, and the rest of his family was sold to a ship bound for Rhode Island. For almost 30 years, Smith was enslaved by various men in Long Island and in Connecticut. During this time, he worked numerous side jobs until he managed to save enough money to purchase his freedom. As a free man, he continued to work and save. With this money, he bought the freedom of his wife, 3 children, and 3 others enslaved men, as well as an estate in East Haddam, Connecticut. In 1798, at 69 years old, Smith published his memoir, A Narrative of the Life and Adventures of Venture, a Native of Africa. He is one of only a few memoirs of someone who survived the Middle Passage. Smith died at his home in East Haddam at the age of 77. His tombstone reads, "Sacred to the memory of Windsor Smith, African. Through the son of a king, he was kidnapped and sold as a slave, but by his industry, he acquired money to purchase his freedom." Tonight, we read Windsor Smith's memoir. It's a little long, longer than the memoir of James Mars, whose narrative we read last year. So in order to keep tonight's reading from going well into the night, he made the difficult decision to remove passages. These include an instance when Smith was attacked by a dog as a boy in Africa, references to other villages his enslavers attacked on their way to the coast, a time when Smith attempted to escape with a group of indentured servants, but they decided to turn back, and the list of various side jobs he worked and how much he was paid for them as a free man. We encourage you to go back and read the narrative in full. Our slightly abridged version is 24 pages long, divided into 22 parts. In order to keep the reading moving smoothly, we ask that each reader note the page number on the back of your respective sheet and keep an eye on the page number top right corner so that you will know when it's your turn to come to the microphone. So item number one.
Number one.
Much like baseball, we have an on deck. Here next to the podium, and ask that when you see that you are next in line to read, please come to the on deck spot and be prepared to continue the reading once the person in front of you has been concluded. We will read continuously until the memoir is completed. For our readers, feel free to read with as much feeling and expression as you like. If you encounter a name or a word with which you are not familiar, please pronounce it as best you can and keep the story moving. And so we'll begin. Reader number one. What? Yes.
Thank you.
I was born at Ducandera in Guinea about the year 1729. My father's name was Sugam Pharaoh, prince of the tribe of the Ducandera. My father had 3 wives. Polygamy was not uncommon in the country, especially among the rich. By his first wife, he had 3 children. The eldest one was myself, named by my father Broteer. The first thing worthy of notice which I remember was a contention between my father and mother on the account of my father's marrying his 3rd wife without the consent of his first, the eldest, which was contrary to the custom generally observed among my countrymen. In consequence of this rupture, my mother left her husband and country and traveled away with her 3 children to the eastward. I was then 5 years old. I was able to travel along by her side. The other 2 of her offspring she carried, one on her back and the other being a suckling child in her arms. Bless her. That's mine. When we became hungry, my mother used to set us down on the ground and gather some of the fruits which grew spontaneously in that climate. These served us for food along the way. At night, we all lay down together in the most secure place we could find and reposed ourselves until morning. 2.
After 5 days' travel, we came to the end of the desert and immediately entered into a beautiful and extensive interval country. Here my mother was pleased to stop and seek a refuge for me. She left me at the house of a very rich farmer. I was then, as I should judge, not less than 140 miles from my native place, separated from all my relations and acquaintances. At this place, my mother took her farewell of me and set out for her own country. My new guardian, as I shall call the man with whom I was left, put me into the business of tending sheep. The flock which I kept with the assistance of a boy consisted of about 40. We drove them every morning between 2 and 3 miles to pasture, into the wide and delightful plains. When night drew on, we drove them home and secured them in the cote. In this round I continued during my stay there. Nothing remarkable happened until my father sent for me to return home. I found that the difference between my parents had been made up previously to their sending for me. On my return, I was received both by my father and mother with great joy and affection, and was once more restored to my paternal dwelling in peace and happiness. I was then about 6 years old.
Not more than 6 weeks had passed after my return before a message was brought to my father by an inhabitant of the place where I lived the preceding year. That place had been invaded by an army from a nation not far distant, furnished with musical instruments and all kinds of arms then in use. They were instigated by some white nation who equipped and sent them to subdue and possess the country. This nation had made no preparation for war, having been for a long time in profound peace that they could not defend themselves against such a formidable train of invaders, and must therefore evacuate their bands to this fierce enemy and fly to the protection of some chief, and that if my father would permit them, they should come under his rule and protection. He was a kind and merciful prince, and therefore consented to these proposals. He had scarcely returned to his nation with the message, before the whole of his people were obliged to retreat to my father's dominions. He gave them every privilege, and all the protection of his government could afford. But they had not been there longer than 4 days before news came to them that the invaders had laid waste to their country, and were coming speedily to destroy them in my father's territories. This affrighted them, and therefore they immediately pushed off to the southward, into the unknown countries there, and were never heard more of.
2 days after their retreat, the report turned out to be but too true. A detachment from the enemy came to my father and informed him that the whole army was encamped not far out of his dominions and would invade the territory and deprive his people of their liberties and rights if he did not comply with the following terms. These were to pay them a large sum of money, 300 fat cattle, and a great number of goats, sheep, asses, etc. My father told the messenger he would comply rather than that his subjects should be deprived of their rights and privileges. But their pledges of faith and honor proved no better than those of other unprincipled, hostile nations. Word came that the enemy who sent terms of accommodation to him and received tribute to their satisfaction would commence their attack in less than 1 day. The messenger concluded with advising him, as he was not prepared for war, to order a speedy retreat of his family and subjects. He complied with this advice. The same night which was fixed upon to retreat, my father and his family set off about break of day. We directed our course for a large shrub plain some distance off, where we intended to conceal ourselves from the approaching enemy until we could refresh and rest ourselves a little. But we presently found that our retreat was not secure, for having struck up a little fire for the purpose of cooking victuals, the enemy discovered us by the smoke of the fire. As soon as we had finished eating, my father discovered the party and immediately began to discharge arrows at them.
Excuse me. If you are responsible, page 6 and page 7, if you can start making your way up here.
Both me and the women who've been unable to make any resistance immediately betook ourselves to the tall, thick reeds not far off, and left the old king to fight alone. For some time I beheld him from the reed defending himself with great courage and firmness, till at last he was obliged to surrender himself into their hands. They then came to us in the reed, and the very first salute I had from them was a violet glow on the top of the head, with the forepart of a gun. I then had a rope put around my neck, as had all the women in the thicket with me, and were immediately led to my father, who was likewise pinioned. In this condition we were all led to the camp. The women and myself, being pretty submissive, had tolerable treatment from the enemy, while my father was closely interrogated respecting his money, which they knew he must have. But as he gave them no account of it, he was instantly cut and pounded on his body with great inhumanity. But he despised all the torture which they inflicted until the continued exercise and increase of torment obliged him to sink and expire. He thus died without informing his enemies of the place where his body lay. I saw him while he was thus tortured to death. The shocking scene is to this day fresh in my mind, and I have often been overcome while thinking on it. He was a man of remarkable strength and resolution, affable, kind, and gentle, ruling with equity and moderation.
After destroying the old prince, they decamped and immediately marched towards the sea, lying to the west, taking with them myself and the women prisoners. The enemy had remarkable success in destroying the country wherever they went, for as far as they had penetrated, they laid habitations waste and captured the people. The distance they now brought me was about 400 miles. I was only 6 years or a half old. They then went on to the next district, which was contiguous to the sea, called in Africa Anamabu. All of us were then put into the castle and kept for market. On a certain time, I and other prisoners were brought on board a vessel belonging to Rhode Island, commanded by Captain Collingwood and the mate, Thomas Mumford. I was brought on board by one Robertson Mumford, steward of the said vessel, and for 4 gallons of rum and a piece of calico, and called Venture, on account of his having captured me with his own private venture. Thus I came by my name.
Chapter 2. After all the business was ended on the coast of Africa, the ship sailed from thence to Barbados. After an ordinary passage, except great mortality by the smallpox, which broke out on board, we arrived at the island of Barbados. But when we reached it, they were found out of the 260 that sailed from Africa, not more than 200 alive. These were all sold except myself, and 3 more to the planters there. The vessel then sailed for Rhode Island, and arrived there after a comfortable passage. Here my master sent me to live with one of his sisters, until he could carry me to Fisher's Island, the place of his residence. I then completed my 8th year. After staying with his sister some time, I was taken to my master's place to live. The first of the time of living at my master's old place, I was pretty much employed in the house at carding wool and other household business. In this situation, I continued for some years, after which my master put me to work outdoors. After many proofs of my faithfulness and honesty, my master began to put great confidence in me. My behavior to him had as yet been submissive and obedient. I then began to have hard tasks imposed on me. Some of these were more to pound 4 bushels of ears of corn every night, and a barrel for the poultry, or be rigorously punished. At other seasons of the year, I had to hard wood until a very late hour. These tasks I had to perform when I was about 9 years old.
Some time after, I had another difficulty, an oppression which was greater than any I had ever experienced since I came to this country. This was to serve two masters. James Mumford, my master's son, would order me to do this and that business different from what my master had directed me. One day in particular, my master having set me off to business to perform that day, and then left me to perform it, only to have his son come to me in the course of the day, big with authority, and command me very arrogantly to quit my present business and go directly about what he should order me. I replied to him that my master had given me so much to perform that day, and that I must therefore faithfully complete it in that time. He then broke out into a great rage, snatched a pickfork, and went to lay me over the head with it. But before I could get another but soon I got another and defended myself with it, or otherwise might have been murdered in his outrage. He immediately called some people who were within hearing distance and ordered them to take his rope and come and bind me with it. They all tried to bind me, but in vain, though there were 3 assailants in number. My upstart master then descended and put his pocket handkerchief before his eyes and went home, with the design to tell his mother of the struggle that young Venetia had given him. He told her that the young Venetia had become stubborn and that he could not control him, and asked her what he should do.
In the meantime, I recovered my temper, voluntarily caused myself to be bound by the same men who tried in vain before, and carried before my young master, that he might do what he pleased with me. He took me to the gallows made for the purpose of hanging cattle on, and suspended me on it. Afterwards he ordered one of his hands to go to the peach orchard, and cut him 3 dozens of whips to punish me with. These were brought to him, and that was all that was done with them. As I was released, I went to work after hanging on the gallows about an hour. After I had lived with my master 13 years, being then about 22 years old, I married Meg, a slave of his who was about my age. At the close of that year, I was sold to a Thomas Stanton, and had to be separated from my wife and my one daughter, who was about 1 month old. He resided at Stonington Point. To this place I brought with me from my late masters 2 Johannes, 3 old Spanish dollars, and 2 thousands of coppers, besides 5 pounds of my wife's money. This money I got by cleaning gentlemen's shoes and drawing boots, by catching muskrats and minks, raising potatoes and carrots, and by fishing in the night. All this money amounted to mere 21 pounds York currency. My master's brother, Robert Stanton, borrowed of me, for when she gave me his note.
About 1.5 years after that time, my master purchased my wife and her child for 700 pounds gold tenor. Towards the close of the time that I resided with this master, I had a falling out with my mistress. This happened one time when my master was gone to Long Island a-gunning. At first, the quarrel began between my wife and her mistress. I was then at work in the barn, and hearing a racket in the house induced me to run there and see what had broken out. When I entered the house, I found my mistress in a violent act with my wife for what she informed me was a mere trifle, such a small affair that I forbear to put my mistress to the shame of having it known. I earnestly requested my wife to beg pardon of her mistress for the sake of peace, even if she had given no just occasion of offense. But whilst I was thus saying, my mistress turned the blows which she was repeating on my wife to me. She took down her horse whip, and while she was glutting her fury with it, I reached out my great black hand and raised it up and received the blows of the whip on it, which were designed for my head. Then I immediately committed the whip to the devouring fire.
When my master returned from the island, his wife told him of the affair, but for the present he seemed to take no notice of it, and mentioned not a word about it to me. Some days after his return, in the morning, as I was putting on a log in the fireplace, not suspecting harm from anyone, I received a most violent stroke on the crown of my head with a club 2 feet long and as large round as a chair post. This blow very badly wounded my head, and the scar of it remains to this day. The first blow made me have my wits about me, you may suppose, for as soon as he went to renew it, I snatched the club out of his hands and dragged him out of the door. He then sent for his brother to come and assist him, but I presently left my master, took the club he wounded me with, carried it to a neighboring justice of the peace, and complained of my master. He finally advised me to return to my master and live contented with him till he abused me again, and then complain. I consented to do so accordingly, but before I set out for my master's, up he come and his brother Robert after me. The justice improved this convenient opportunity to caution my master. He asked him for what he treated his slave thus hastily and unjustly, and told him what would be the consequence if he continued the same treatment toward me. After the justice had ended his discourse with my master, he and his brothers set out with me for home, one before and the other behind me. When they had come to a by place, they both dismounted their respective horses and fell to beating me with great violence. I became enraged at this and immediately turned them both under me, laid one of them across the other, and stamped both with my feet.
This occasioned my master's brother to advise him to put me off. A short time after this, I was taken by a constable and 2 men. They carried me to a blacksmith shop and had me handcuffed. When I returned home, my mistress inquired which of her waiters with a denture was handcuffed. When she was informed that I was, she appeared to be very contented and was much transported with the news. In the midst of this content enjoyed, I presented myself before my mistress, shewed her my handcuffs, and gave her thanks for my gold rings. For this my master commanded a negro of his to fetch him a large ox chain. This my master locked on my legs with teapad belt. I continued to wear the chain peaceably to 2 or 3 days, when the master asked me with contemptuous hard names whether I had not better be freed from my chains and go to work. I answered him no. Well then, said he, I will send you to the West Indies or banish you, for I am resolved not to keep you. I answered him, I crossed the waters to come here, and I am willing to cross them to return. For a day or 2 after this, not any one said much to me, until one Hempstead miner of Stonington asked me if I would live with him. I answered him that I would. He then requested me to make myself discontented and to appear as unreconciled to my master as I could before he bargained with him to me, and that in return he would give me a good chance to gain my freedom when I came to live with him. I did as he requested me. Not long after, Hempstead Miner purchased me of my master for £56 lawful. He took the chain and padlocks from off me immediately.
It may here be remembered that I related a few pages back that I lent out a sum of money to Mr. Robert Stanton and took his note for it. In the fray between my master Stanton and myself, he broke open my chest containing his brother's note to me and destroyed it. Immediately after my present master bought me, he determined to sell me at Hartford. As soon as I became apprised of it, I bethought myself that I would secure a certain sum of money which lay by me. Accordingly, I buried it in the earth, a little distance from Thomas Stanton's in the road over which he passes daily. A short time after my master carried me to Hartford and proposed to sell me to one William Hooker of that place, Hooker asked whether I would go to the German flats with him. I answered no. My master next offered me to Daniel Edwards, Esquire, of Hartford, for sale. My master pawned me to him for £10. After some trial of my honesty, Mr. Edwards placed considerable trust and confidence in me. He put me to serve as his cupbearer and waiter. When there was company at his house, he would send me into his cellar and other parts of his house to fetch wine and other articles occasionally for them. When I had been with him some time, he asked me why my master wished to part with such an honest Negro. I replied that I could not give him the reason. Mr. Edwards told me that he should be very willing to keep me for himself, and that he would never let me go from him to live, or if it was not unreasonable and inconvenient for me to be parted from my wife and children. Therefore, he would furnish me with a horse and return to Stonington, if I had a mind for it.
I went and called at my old master Stanton's house first to see my wife, who was then owned by him. As my old master appeared much ruffled at my being there, I left my wife before I had spent any considerable time with her, and went to Colonel Smith. Minor had not yet wholly settled with Stanton for me, and had before my return from Hartford given Colonel Smith a bill of sale for me. Once these men met to determine which of them should hold me, and upon me expressing my desire to be owned by Colonel Smith, and up upon my master's settling the remainder of the money which was due to Stanton for me, it was agreed that I should live with Colonel Smith. This was the third time of my being sold. I was then 31 years old. I asked my master one time if he would consent to have me purchase my freedom. He replied that he would. I was very happy, knowing that then I was at that one time able to pay part of the purchase of money by means of the money which some time ago I had buried. This I took out of the earth and tendered to my master. I still continued to work for Colonel Smith. I also laid out in a land adjoining to my old master Stanton's, by cultivating this land with not but the greatest diligence and economy. At times when my master did not require my labor, in 2 years I had gained £10.
Being encouraged by the success which I had had in redeeming myself, I again solicited my master for a further chance of completing it. The chance for which I solicited him was that of going out to work the ensuing winter. He agreed to this on the condition that I would give him 1/4 of my earnings. On these terms I worked the following winter, and earned £4 16s, 1/4 of which went to my master for the privilege, and the rest was paid him on my own account. This added to the other payments made up £44 8s, which I had paid on my own account. I was then about 35 years old. The next summer I again desired that he would give me a chance of going out to work. But he refused, and answered that he must have my labor this summer, as he did not have it the past winter. I replied that I considered it hard that I could not have a chance to work out when the season became advantageous, and that I must only be permitted to hire myself out for the poorest season of the year. He asked me after this, what I would give him for the privilege per month. I replied that I would leave it wholly with his own generosity to determine what I should return him a month. Well then, said he, if so, £2 a month. I answered him that if that was the least he would take, I would be contented.
Accordingly, I hired myself out at Fisher's Island and earned £20, £13 6 shillings, of which my master drew for the privilege, and the remainder I paid him for my freedom. This made £51 2 shillings, which I paid him. In October following, I went and wrought 6 months at Long Island. In that 6 months' time, I cut and corded 400 cords of wood, besides threshing out 75 bushels of grain. I returned to my master and gave him what I received of my 6 months' labor. This left only £13 18 shillings to make up the full sum for my redemption. My master liberated me, saying that I might pay what was behind if I could ever make it convenient. Otherwise, it would be well. The amount of money which I had paid my master towards redeeming my time was £71 2 shillings. The result of my master for asking such an unreasonable price was, he said, to secure himself in case I should ever come to want. Being 36 years old, I left Colonel Smith once for all. I had already been sold 3 different times, made considerable money with seemingly nothing to derive it from, been cheated out of a large sum of money, lost much by misfortunes, and paid an enormous sum for my freedom.
Chapter 3. My wife and children were yet in bondage to Mr. Thomas Stanton. I sold all my possessions at Stonington, consisting of a pretty piece of land and on one dwelling house thereon, and then went to reside at Long Island. For the first 4 years of my residence there, I spent my time in working for various people on that and on at the neighboring islands. In the aforementioned 4 years, what wood I cut at Long Island amounted to several thousand cords, and the money which I earned thereby amounted to £270 10 shillings. Being after this labor for 40 years of age, I worked at various places, and in particular on Ram Island, where I purchased Solomon and Cuff, 2 sons of mine, for $200 each. It will here be remembered how much money I earned by cutting wood in 4 years. Besides this, I had considerable money, amounting in all to near £300. When I had purchased my 2 sons, I had then left more than £100. After this, I purchased a Negro man, for no other reason than to oblige him, and gave for him £60. But in a short time after, he ran away from me.
The rest of my money I laid out in land, in addition to a farm which I owned before the dwelling house thereon. 44 years had then completed their revolution since my entrance into this existence of servitude and misfortune. Solomon, my eldest son, being then in his 17th year, and all my hope and dependence for help, I hired him out to one Charles Church of Rhode Island for 1 year, on consideration of his giving him £12 and an opportunity of acquiring some learning. In the course of the year, Church fitted out a vessel for a whaling voyage, and being in want of hands to man her, he induced my son to go, with the promise of giving him on his return a pair of silver buckles besides his wages. As soon as I heard of his going to sea, I immediately set out to go and prevent it if possible. But on my arrival at Church's, to my great grief, I could only see the vessel my son was in almost out of sight going to sea. My son died of the scurvy in this voyage, and Church has never paid me the least of his wages. My other son, being but a youth, still lived with me. About this time I chartered a sloop of about 30 tons burthen and hired men to assist me in navigating her. I employed her mostly in the wood trade to Rhode Island, and made clear of all expenses above $100 with her in better than 1 year. I had then become something forehanded, and being in my 44th year, I purchased my wife, Meg, and thereby prevented having another child to buy, as she was then pregnant. I gave 40 pounds for her.
During my residence at Long Island, I raised 1 year with another 10 cartloads of watermelons. What I made by the watermelons I sold there amounted to nearly $500. In the nighttime, I fished with set nets and pots for eels and lobsters, and shortly after went a whaling voyage in the service of Colonel Smith. After being out 7 months, the vessel returned laden with 400 barrels of oil. About this time, I became possessed of another dwelling house, and my temporal affairs were in a pretty prosperous condition. And next, after my wife, I purchased a Negro man for $400, but having an inclination to return me to his old master, I therefore let him go. Shortly after, I purchased another Negro man for 25 pounds, whom I parted with shortly after. Being about 46 years old, I bought my oldest child, Hannah, of Ray Mumford, for 44 pounds, and she still resided with him. I had already redeemed from slavery myself, my wife, and 3 children, besides 3 Negro men.
About the 47th year of my life, I disposed to all my property at Long Island and came from thence into East Haddam. I hired myself out at first to Timothy Chapman for 5 weeks, the earnings of which time I put up carefully by me. After this, I wrought for Abel Bingham about 6 weeks, and then put my money together and purchased of said Bingham 10 acres of land lying at Haddam Neck, where I now reside. On this land I labored with great diligence for 2 years, and shortly after purchased 6 acres more of land contiguous to my other. 1 year from that time I purchased 70 acres more of the same man, and paid for it mostly with the produce of my other land. Soon after, I bought this last lot of land. It set up a comfortable dwelling house on my farm, and built it from the produce thereof. Shortly after, I had much trouble and expense with my daughter Anna. She was married soon after I redeemed her to one Isaac, a free Negro, and shortly after her marriage fell sick of a mortal disease. Her husband, a desolate and abandoned wretch, paid but little attention to her in her illness. I therefore thought it best to bring her to my house and nurse her there. I procured her all the aid mortals could afford, but notwithstanding this, she fell prey to her disease after a lingering and painful endurance of it.
Having reached my 54th year, I hired 2 Negro men, one named Willie and Jacqueline, and the other Mingo. Mingo lived with me 1 year, and having received his wages, run in debt to me $8, for which he gave me his note. Presently, after he tried to run away from me without troubling himself to pay the note, I procured a warrant, took him, and requested him to go to Justice Throop's off of his own accord. But he refusing, I took him upon my shoulders and carried him there. The justice asking me if I had my prisoner's note with me, and replying that I had not. He told me that I must return with him and get it. Accordingly, I carried Mingo back on my shoulders, but before we arrived at my dwelling, he complained of being hurt. He then told me that if I would let him off with my shoulders, he had a pair of silver shoe buckles, they never do, 1 shirt, and a pocket handkerchief, which he would turn out to me. I agreed, and let him return home with me on foot. But the very following night, he slipped from me, stole my horse. The other Negro man, Jacqueline, being a comb maker by trade, he requested me to set him up, and promised to reward me well with his labor. Accordingly, I bought him a set of tools for making combs, and procured him stock. He worked at my house about 1 year, and then ran away from me with all of his combs, and owed me for all his board.
Since my residence in Haddam Neck, I have owned of boats, canoes, and sail vessels, not less than 20. These I mostly employed in the fishing and trafficking business. And in these occupations, I have been cheated out of considerable money by people whom I traded with. I'm now 69 years old, though once straight and tall, measuring without shoes 6 feet 1 inch and a half, and every way well proportioned. I'm now bowed down with age and hardship. My strength, which was once equal, not superior to any man whom I have ever seen, is now enfeebled so that life is a burden, and it is with fatigue that I walk a couple of miles, stooping over my staff. Other griefs are still behind, on account of which some aged people, at least, will pity me. My eyesight has rapidly failed, till I'm almost blind, and whenever I go abroad, one of my grandchildren has direct my way. It's nice to be has them. But amidst all my griefs and pains, I have many consolations. Meg, the wife of my youth, whom I married for love and bought with my money, is still alive. My freedom is a privilege which nothing else can equal. Notwithstanding all the losses I have suffered, I am now possessed of more than 100 acres of land, and 3 habitable dwelling houses. It gives me joy to think that I have and that I serve so good a character, especially for truth and integrity. While I'm now looking to the grave as my home, my joy for this world would be full, if my children, if Cuff and Solomon, that they had walked in the way of their father. But a father's lips are closed in the silence and in grief. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Wow.
Once again, please give yourselves a professional lady of the meeting. Thank you all for participating tonight in this commemoration of Juneteenth. I hope you found it as enlightening as I did. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please join us here in Windsor Historical Society for future programs. Thank you again, and good night.